To give some backstory to this, I am currently a 23-year-old male that has spent a substantial amount of time in the woods. I hunt, fish, prefer swimming in lakes to chlorine. Grew up in western Pennsylvania, playing capture the flag and release in the woods with the neighborhood kids. Before this story, I have never felt uncomfortable, nervous, or like I wasn't the top of the food chain. In the middle of 2015, I decided to take a girl I was seeing to Raccoon State Park in western Pennsylvania for a picnic. We parked at the camp office and headed down the main park road towards the trails away from the lake. We made our way up the trail road, and I decided to head right at the fork up the gravel service road. We get up to a trailhead that I was familiar with, that I knew had a nice clearing with a few benches, just a short hike back into the woods, give or take a mile and a half. When we got to the park benches, we both mentioned it was kind of quiet. I shrugged it off and opened up my bag to start cooking. As the grill heated up, I was preparing the meat and veggies. She started getting nervous. She kept saying she did not like this part of the woods, she wasn't comfortable, etc. I didn't notice anything. I attributed this to the fact that she grew up in Miami and never really went into the woods. As the kebabs are on the grill, I start to hear movement in the woods. Assuming it was a rabbit or other small animal, I started making jokes about her being afraid of a bunny. As we are eating, I start to feel very uneasy. I told Kate that after we were done eating, we should head back down towards the lake. We begin to hear more rustling from farther down the trail. She gets very nervous and starts asking if we can go to the lake now. I decide to head down the trail a little ways to show her nothing is wrong. Still, assuming it was some small critter, I head down the trail about 100 yards, and it's obvious that this part of the trail had not been recently used. The further down the trail I go, the more I start to feel something is weird. The quiet mixed with a feeling of I am definitely not the top of the food chain freaked me out. I get back to the benches, and she tells me that she feels like she is being watched. She insists on heading back down to the car. She is unnerved to the point that the lake isn't an option. I agree and back up to begin heading down. On the way out, we are moving quickly. I still feel like I am prey, and she is insisting that something is watching us. As we get to the service road, whatever was making the noise in the foliage was not only staying with us, but was getting louder. I am convinced whatever was making those noises had to be large, bigger than a man. Neither of us ever saw what was in the woods. I am convinced whatever was in those woods was not any animal I have ever heard in the woods of Pennsylvania, and definitely was not human. I, to this day, believe I was being hunted by something and refuse to return to that portion of the park. I live in eastern Finland, in a small city. Most of the cities here are like openings or holes in a forest. If you looked at them down from the sky, in the Finnish folklore, there are many stories of forest creatures and spirits that guard the forest and lead people astray. There are even stories of forest shrouding a person so that he or she gets lost in it for years. That there is an upside-down world. And that where all kinds of wondrous and scary ancient things live. There are stories of a lot of people going into the forest shroud and making it out years later with odd stories to tell. There's this birch forest near my home. A black river streams through it, and it floods in the spring. I usually walk the dog in there because I think it's beautiful. Birch tree forests aren't that common over here, and the trees are old. Some of them are huge, old, and full of fungi and twisted. Sometimes I take the kids there too. My daughter is very sensitive in a way. From an early age, she's been seeing and talking to imaginary things. Some of them which were odd. For example, my now dead grandmother. My daughter, she never met her, but often talked about her. One day, when we were eating out for dinner, she just stood up, looked out the window, and burst into tears and cried, "Goodbye, Mama." That was the end of the imaginary friend that we thought was my grandmother. It's curious because I think my daughter kind of reminds me of her too. One time, during the day when we were walking among the birch woods, my daughter said that there was somebody there. A dead horse named Lotta. She told me that it was a very old horse and it lived there. I laughed to her. I'm just used to these kind of stories from her. I smile, shrug, and laugh at them. But there's always this weird undertone to them. Stories are fantastic and imaginative, but eerily consistent, like an unconscious hint of a memory. I think she's just a smart child with a good imagination. When she cries at night, and I walk into the room, I find her sleepwalking and pointing at an empty chair in the middle of the room, with her tiny index finger. It feels uncanny, like there's something between the lines. A couple of months ago, it was a full moon and I was walking my dog at night. I was going for a walk in the birch forest. The moon painted the frost bluish. As I approached the forest, the birch trees rose from the frozen ground like these white upside-down runs, and behind them, just black with hints of more white sides on the trees. It must have been like 100 meters away when I heard something from the dark forest. Something heavy was moving around there, crashing away in the forest. Sometimes, I've heard the rabbits scream in there when a lynx or a fox gets them. The rabbits scream like a small child when they are dying. But this was something different. A wild boar, maybe a moose. The dog was also interested in the sounds. Its ears pointed upwards. We walked closer to the white trees and the noises got louder. We both stopped to look. The dog didn't bark. It just pointed its nose towards the sound. We were like 20 meters away from the tree line when the sound stopped. For a while, it was just quiet. Then it started again. Something started running in the forest, near the tree line. Not from us, but toward us. It gives me chills just remembering this. Heavy, amazingly fast steps. I started to think it was a bipedal according to the sounds it made. 20 to 30 meters in, it made only a couple of sounds. In the pitch black and on uneven forest ground, somehow it was making up so much ground without tripping or anything, between the trunks and overfallen trees and bushes. It's not a human being. It's not a moose, I remember thinking. My dog's head accordingly turned to the movement. And then it stopped. Right before us, I felt the darkness staring at me and I stared back. For sure, I wasn't going in the forest with my dog. But something dark was facing us. Just to the left of the path I was going to walk to enter the forest. It was making sounds in front of us. I started on my way back from the tree line, still facing the woods and the sounds. Whatever was in there, it was very interested in us. But I didn't seem to want to come out of the forest. I wasn't going to turn my back to it, that's for sure. My hands curled into fists. The dog had his tail between his legs as we backed away. The sounds continued. I could hear them even from over 100 meters away. It was then that I turned my back on it and started walking away. I walked fast, thinking all the possible forms of the darkness could have just been anything and maybe it was my imagination playing on me. The terror I felt was real. I rushed to my home and locked the door. Even my wife got nervous seeing me spook like that. I've been in the forest almost every night since then, walking the dog, and I've never seen anything or heard anything since. But I've always been on alert since that night, wondering if not knowing what that was might be hazardous. I've never seen or heard anything since that night, and I've never heard or seen anything move so fast through the woods before. But then I think about the dead horse my daughter said she saw. I know little children see things, but I also know their interpretations of things might be off. They see more than us adults who have learned to see the world around us in a certain way, but therefore lacking the ability to describe it. Maybe she didn't see a dead horse at all, but something that she couldn't describe in any other way. To give this story some context, I need to state a few details about myself. My name is Jay, and I am 17 years old from the UK. I had a close friend. From the age of 13 to 16, he was my closest friend, and we did everything together. His name was John. We were both massively into wilderness survival, so we planned a trip to Scotland to spend a week alone in the forest to get a real survival experience. We were both really excited and invested in all the equipment needed to bring with us, as our parents wouldn't let us go without the correct safety measures. To give a brief idea of what we took, here is a list of the main items we took: a tent, a small combat knife each, a camping stove, rations, and miscellaneous items such as rope, blankets, etc. After a long, dull, 10-hour car journey, we eventually made it to the edge of the forest. We were sent to venture in. My heart raced with excitement as I starved to get into the forest ahead. It was a lush green with flowers scattered around the floor. It was everything I imagined and more. We lugged our rucksacks onto our backs and started the long walk to where we planned to camp. It was a good 8-mile hike to get to the loch where we planned to camp near. I believe it was called Loch and Rye or something along those lines. So we were ready for a 3 to 4 hour walk. This didn't faze me at all, as I was excited that I'd finally get to camp in the wild, as where I live there weren't really any places that you can camp away from other people. John was equally as happy as I was, with a wide smile across his face. After about an hour of walking, we stopped to take a break and had something to eat and drink. We were sat on a large rock in the middle of a clearing in the woods. Surprisingly, it was a nice day, and the sun was shining through the trees onto us. As we ate, we noticed a deer carcass about 20 feet away. Upon closer inspection, we found that it was pretty fresh, a day or two old at most, and the way it had died was definitely not natural. A large, deep gash ran across his neck, and his hooves had been cut off, as well as his eyes being removed, leaving deep, empty sockets with flies buzzing in and out. Me and John were curious of what had truly happened, but just guessed that it was some messed up kids or something, as we were only an hour deep into the forest. After that encounter, we moved on and completely forgot about it. After another 3 hours of walking, we arrived at the loch. It was a beautiful clear body of water, with large fish swimming around. We found a flat patch of land, and I proceeded to set up the tent to our camp, as the night was drawing close. After about half an hour, we had camp set up and a fire made. After a quick meal, we went straight to bed as we were exhausted from the walk. For the first few days, nothing suspicious happened. We just built shelters and hunted to our heart's content. But on the 4th night, I left the camp to take a pee. After walking a good 50 meters away, I stopped to pee. When I looked up, I was horrified to see another deer, exactly the same as the other one that me and John had found on the way here. I shrieked and ran back to our camp. My heart was racing as I thought of all the reasons why it could have been there, and that close to our camp. What was happening? What if whoever did that finds us? Will we suffer a similar fate? I returned to find John putting the fire out, as he was about to get into the tent. I caught my breath, and John asked what was up. I grabbed him and jumped into the tent. "What are you doing?" John said in his usual loud voice. I hushed him and explained about the deer. He laughed and brushed it off as a joke, thinking that I was trying to scare him. I tried telling him that I wasn't joking, but he just laughed and said, "Prove it." There was no chance in hell that I was going back in that direction. As John reached for the zipper on the tent, a faint chanting started. It must have been in the distance, but it was enough to spook us both. We both grabbed our little combat knives and clutched them as if it would bring us safety. The chanting grew louder and louder, and we decided that we needed to get the hell out of there. We grabbed our small emergency rucksacks and unzipped the tent floor. To our horror, there was around 4 cloaked figures just 15 feet away from us. We both froze in horror for a moment until one of the figures started to move forward. We freaked out and bolted away. But there was one more of those figures on the other side of our tent. We dashed through the 2 of the smaller ones. They tried to reveal that they were wielding jagged knives. This sight made my heart sink, and I pushed my leg as hard as I could. The next time we looked back, we finally lost them. My heart was racing. What kind of sick people would do that? Was it some kind of sick joke? I was glad that I escaped with my life, as I know that I am not the strongest runner. John looked at me with fear still in his eyes and asked, "What the hell just happened?" I couldn't reply as I was so exhausted from running. We spent the rest of the night hiding up in a tree until the sun rose. Then we immediately went back to the road and called to be picked up, leaving all our gear behind. We didn't report to the police as we thought they simply wouldn't believe us. Till this day, I still wonder what those people were actually doing out there. Was it simply animal sacrifices or worse? Until now, I haven't been able to share my story as I thought no one would believe me. So this was back when I was about 15 or 16. I was riding my dirt bike around the woods and I wanted to explore a bit. I was tired of riding the same trails, so I drug my bike under an old gate and rode up this washed out road. I saw this little hill that looked like it would be an awesome thing to jump. So I got off my bike and climbed up to make sure that there wasn't anything I could hit if I jumped it. As soon as I got to the top, I got a weird feeling that I can't explain. It was a sunny hot day, but everything was shaded, and it was cool there. I felt really comfortable, like I belonged there, so I decided to explore a little more. It was a little half the size of a football field, and there were some rocks in the middle, and everything was covered with little green vines. So I decided to lay down on the rocks and relax. Laying there felt like time stopped. I couldn't have been there for more than 5 minutes when I got this strange feeling that I needed to leave. I jumped up and looked around, and it was darker, and the green vines had all turned a brownish color. I couldn't remember how to leave, so I ran to one side looking over and didn't see the road. I ran back to the other side and saw the road, but the hill looked like it was 10 feet taller and steeper. I grabbed a little tree and dropped off, holding it and letting it go. I hit the ground, grabbed my bike, and still couldn't remember how to leave. But I wasn't staying there, so I just took off. I grew up riding on this mountain, and there are only 4 places you can come out. I ended up coming out on the opposite side of the mountain and the road down to a friend's house. I told him about my experience, and he told me to talk to his uncle. His uncle was around 45 years old and went hunting ginseng out here when he was a kid. He knew every inch of the mountain, but he said 2 years ago, before he was hunting ginseng, he found a similar spot. He got lost and ended up spending 7 hours trying to find his way back out. His brother was worried because he was supposed to meet back at the truck and never showed up. It's like there was something there luring you within a false sense of peace when you're relaxed and it strikes. He said his grandma used to tell him stories of a witch that lived up on the mountain. And I don't know about that, but it scared me. Here's my story. My cousin and I were out in the woods behind her house, and we were just messing around. We thought we would try to hand at making one of those cheesy YouTube horror series. So we both started recording on our phones. Well, as it was starting to get dark, the 2 of us decided to separate for plot purposes. And we got to this clearing area. She was supposed to scream. So she takes off running as planned, and I'm trying to catch up to her. Well, then I actually got lost. I couldn't find the trail that we had come down on there, and I started yelling her name because she wasn't supposed to go too far. She should have still been able to hear me, but she didn't answer. Then I heard her scream, which was planned, and then I yelled back, "Where are you? I can't find the trail." And she yells, "I'm at the road." So I'm still lost, and I start texting her, telling her to come back, but she wouldn't answer any of my text or calls. And right about the time that she calls back, I had finally found the trail again and was walking down a hill. I told her that I heard her yell that she was at the road and I was on my way there. And then she tells me that she didn't say that. I didn't believe her though. I was like, "I heard you say it, quit listening around." Then I tripped and fell and dropped the phone, and then picked it back up, laughing at my clutch self, and she asked me, "Who was that?" And said that she hears a man's voice on my end. I never got any proof of that though. At this point, she tells me she's coming back, and it wasn't a few seconds later that she walks over the hill, and we hang up our phones and head back to home together. We were just thinking that we got ourselves all worked up because we were trying to film something scary, but we were just never able to come up with an explanation for how I got lost and who that man could have been. Hey guys, before we get into these middle of nowhere camping stories, I just wanted to say that I'm going to be giving away 3 $25 Amazon gift cards to say thank you for all the support over the past year. All you have to do to enter is check out the pinned comment below. There will be a link with all the information that you need. We were teenagers. We were in love. This was in the late 90s before cell phones and prepaid AOL internet. Our parents were protective of us. He was captain of the football team and I was cheer captain. We were heavily regulated by parents and coaches, but still had our bad streak. We knew what we wanted to get down. We got the great idea that we would steal some alone time if we hid a tent during the day in a city forest. We decided we would hide a tent, set it up, and return after the game in the dark. We set up the pop-up tent, 2 sleeping bags, 2 fleece blankets, 2 pillows, 3 extra tent spikes, a mag light, condoms, and 2 bottles of water. All set. After the game, we told our parents that we were going for ice cream for a few hours. We drove down to a rural public launch site where we could walk 20 minutes into the woods toward a little camp. We got there, started making out in the dark, and turned into crazy heart-pounding awesomeness. I stopped. I told him to stop. I heard footsteps outside of our tent. I prayed it was a deer, but then it was clearly bipedal, and I prayed for a bear. Then I heard the man breathing. I smelled a cigarette. Neither of us smoked. We put our clothes on. I picked up a tent stake and shoved it in my boyfriend's hand, and he stood up and saw his wallet in the corner of the tent and shoved it into his pocket. I picked up one of each of the remaining 10 stakes in my hands. The footsteps stopped. I unzipped the tent quickly. My boyfriend pushed me out in front of him. What a gentleman. And I have another story following that. We ran through the woods, not looking back. We got into his car and tore out, both of us sobbing. He pulled over, pulling into my driveway so I could puke. My boyfriend went home, and we decided the next morning that he would go back to the site to get our expensive tent and blankets that we had left around midnight before. He had to work at 5:30 a.m. When he returned, there was nothing there. No blankets, no pillows, no tent. We made no police report. I mean, what could we say? We were horny teenagers making horror movie decisions. My mom still asks about the pink and white fleece blanket I lost that night. I never have an answer. To whoever was smoking a cigarette in the woods, listening to 2 teens having fun, and then scaring them and stealing their tent, that's probably the shittiest thing that's ever happened to anybody. I was working in the Czech Republic at a kids' summer camp when I was 20. It was nothing like the American summer camps I've seen on TV. It was much more relaxed. We owned a huge cabin in the forest just outside a small town. There were walking tracks around, and people would walk past our cabin and field area from time to time. One day, I was doing some small crafts with the group. We were at a table that could be seen from the walking tracks when this guy walked past. He's alone, about 30, and had dreads, heavy boots, and these patchwork pants on, and a loose metal singlet. He stops mid-walk when he spots us and starts to approach. He asks me in Czech if I have any cigarettes. I tell him in Czech, I'm sorry, I don't speak Czech very well, in an attempt for him to give up and leave. I'm trying to be nice because I have 5 kids sitting at the table and I don't want them to be scared. He then switches to English and I'm like, fuck. It was a 50-50 chance that he would speak English in a part of the country like this. He then comments on my tattoos I have a sleeve, asking me all this stuff. Says he's going to get a new one soon. He asks about the cigarettes again. I say no and was polite about the tattoos but not encouraging conversation. He asks my name and I tell him and he keeps talking for a bit. After a while he moves on. I sigh with relief and the day continues. Later that afternoon, it was around 6, still light and we were killing time before dinner was being served. I was in the field outside the cabin and some kids running around. Other leaders were doing various activities with kids, when all of a sudden, another leader got my attention and told me to get the kids inside. I looked up on either side of the field, where the trees start. There were a lot of guys dressed similar to the guy earlier, standing just back from the tree line. They had spread and approached from different directions. Then, I hear someone shouting my name. We move all of the kids inside and lock the door. The 3 male leaders we have go out to talk to the guys in the forest. My friend says they were just calling my name. I start freaking out. What the fuck? Is it the guy from the morning? I want to show her my new tattoo. Confused, the leaders come back and are like, who is this guy? They know I'm not Czech and I don't know many people outside of our circle, so they knew it was odd. I tell them about the morning and that I don't want to see him again. They go back out and tell the guys to leave after some fuss and yelling out for me again. They leave. For the rest of the trip I was paranoid that they would come back, especially at night. And luckily, they didn't. Last summer, I had the amazing experience of working and leading tours in the longest cave in the world. After working there for a few weeks, I started hearing stories of some of the other rangers' experiences. I will share them in the future if I get there okay. Mammoth Cave has a long history of paranormal experiences. It is the place that inspired H.P. Lovecraft to write The Beast in the Cave, and I have personally met rangers who have seen full-body apparitions, had orbs that have flown around tours, and have been forcefully shoved to the ground while leading tours. My first experience happened just a few weeks into the job. I was trailing our most popular tour, the historic tour, and we had just made it to the second stop of the tour, at Giant's Coffin. This is a place that a lot of rangers, including myself, like to turn out the lights and show the tourists total darkness. It is also known to rangers as a paranormal hotspot. As I said, I was trailing the tour, which means I was at the back, just watching over the tour. The tour was well behaved, and I was just sitting there enjoying the darkness. It is kind of peaceful. As I was looking back the way we have came from, down an area as known as Broadway, there's a place also down there called Cyclops Gateway. I saw a light. It was a bright light. It was like a pinprick of light. Of course, I thought I was just seeing things, so I held my hand up, thinking that if it was in my head, I should not be able to block it out with my hand. Surprisingly though, I was, and I just looked at it until the lights came back on, and before the group moved on, I went and looked where it had been. It was just a rock with nothing on it to reflect any light. I do not have any explanation for this. I have seen this phenomenon one other time in another room known as the Methodist Church, another known hotspot. About a month after this happened, I was talking with someone, and they all of a sudden pointed to Coffin's Corner. And when I told some of the veterans, they were not surprised in the slightest. Now, my next experience happened several months later. I was leading a different tour, the Mammoth Passage tour, and I led the group back to a room known as Rathfinesk Hall. On the tour, I would turn the lights out there and tell a story of Charles Harvey. It is a very old story dating back to the 1800s of a man who got lost in Mammoth Cave for 39 hours. I won't go into the whole thing. The short version is, though, that he forgets his hat and goes back in to get it. He gets lost trying to rejoin his tour group, and eventually his light goes out. So he sits in total darkness and silence. He starts to go mad and starts banging rocks together. It's because the rocks banging that he is found and rescued. Now, when I finish the story and turn the lights back on, I am taking a few questions. Then back down the passageway, we hear knocks banging together. Now, I knew that my trailing ranger was back down there controlling the light switch, and I thought he was doing it. So I played it off as a joke, saying it could be the ghost of Charles, still lost in the cave. On the way back out of the cave, I asked him about the rocks, and he said, "I thought you were banging them together." I later found out that he was about 100 feet down outside the passageway looking at old signatures on the wall when he heard it too, coming from back where we were. He has had his own experiences, and I trust that he was not pulling a prank. Now, if I have piqued your interest in Mammoth Cave, go and visit. Ask the rangers if they've had any experiences. They might just tell you a story. If you want to go to the most haunted areas of the cave, come and visit during the summer and take the Violet City Lantern Tour. You get to walk by the tuberculosis hits where people withered away in the cave, hoping to be cured, and where they found a 2,000-year-old Native American mummy who was crushed under a fallen rock.